These readings that are proclaimed this time of the year, at the end of the liturgical year, are very serious, aren't they? They're not very cheery. We hear these readings today, we can hear the joy of those two faithful servants that invested the money that had been left to them, and then the one poor servant who out of fear hid the money, and then it was all taken from him. Never got to share in his master's joy. And obviously these parables strike a serious note in our lives about our Christian living, and especially how do we live our lives in anticipation for the end of the world? How do we live our lives in anticipation when that day will come for each and every one of us at some point in our lives when we will die, when we will be called into everlasting life? And this reading surely speaks about that accounting that we will give to our God of what he has given to us. And obviously this parable is much more than about money. But it's important to know what was going on here. This idea of talent. I mean, we understand the word talent in English, and it means, those gifts that we have that are special to us. It didn't have that meaning yet. That meaning came later on. A talent was a huge amount of money. Probably if it was silver talents in the day of Jesus, it was 15 or 20 years worth of what a person made in a year. That's a lot of money. For some people, that could be like $1 million. And so think about that talent. Think about how much was entrusted to this person, to these three people. Their master entrusted them with a lot, his own possessions. But we know, again, that this is much more than about money. What I want to focus in on is that relationship that exists. The understanding that exists of, let's contrast the first two servants from the third. They understood that they had been entrusted with this great, generous amount of money. They knew and they understood the heart of the owner, of their master. They knew what he wanted. And they did it. They took a risk. They invested that which was entrusted to them, and it bore fruit. Their investments doubled. They were able to give back more than what they had received. Because they were willing to risk, they were willing to give it away. They understood. And then look at the response of the master to them. Come, you did well. Come and share your master's joy. Come into the kingdom prepared for you. That joy that was theirs. Because they took what had been so generously given to them, invested it, and they gave it back. And then the one poor servant. Look at his relationship. Look at what he said to that master. I mean, in as many words as he's saying, he's calling him a thief. Hey, master, where you gather where you don't plant. Well, hello. He's calling him a thief. There's a relationship based out of fear. No wonder he did what he did. Because he didn't understand his master as he truly was. He didn't understand this great gift that was entrusted to him as it truly existed. And that great gift that was for him to return. Okay, now I'm going to go away from the money idea, but understanding this as spiritual gifts. These talents is about God's life within us. The gift of his friendship. The gift of salvation. The gift of faith. The gift of generosity. The gift of life. However you understand these things, these spiritual things, these gifts that God gives to us, we need to understand how generous God is, how much he entrusts to us. He doesn't do it in a scare sort of a way. And those times that we're afraid to put what God has given to us into practice, we need to understand, where do we put ourselves? Where do I put myself? In that trusting relationship with those first two servants, or that fearful relationship? That one that doesn't understand the generosity of God to me? Or one that sees God as demanding? Or one that says I need to cling on to what God has given to me? Or one that is willing to let it go and trust and in love? There's so much more in this gospel. But suffice, let's take this gospel and meditate upon it. Not only to discern what are those gifts that God has given to you, and you have them. They're there. They're there not for the taking, they're there for the receiving. There's the difference. They're there to receive in trust and in love. But what God expects for us is not to cling to them, not to hold on to them, not to live in fear, to live in distrust, but rather to share them. The gift of faith grows into the extent that we share our faith. The gift of love grows to the extent which we share our love. The gift of generosity grows to the extent in which we share our generosity. And that goes on and on. That is the promise of our God to us today. So let us imitate the generosity, the love, the faith of our God, who's entrusted us with so much. And trust that we will put it into practice, so that it can bear fruit in our lives, that we can present this to our Lord when he calls us on the last day.